She looked me dead in the eyes, raised her glass of overpriced Pinot, and with a smug half-smile said, "You're expired trash. This family's future doesn't need your rotten past." The room went still. Silverware paused mid-air. My son didn't say a word. He didn't even flinch. I sat there staring at the woman he chose, the woman he married, the woman who just called his mother garbage at her own Thanksgiving table. I felt the heat rise under my collarbone, but I didn't speak. Not yet. I just lowered my eyes, folded my napkin, and took another slow bite of dry turkey, as if I hadn't just been gutted in front of 10 people. People say silence is weakness. I say silence is planning. That day, I didn't lose my dignity. I buried it, for now, deep enough that she'd think it was gone for good. Because while she was basking in her petty victory, I was rewriting the end of her story. She didn't know it yet, but dessert would come with a signature, and it wouldn't be mine. If you've ever sat quietly at a table where someone thought their cruelty made them clever, hit that like button. If you've ever watched someone you raised turn into a stranger while you swallowed your pride for the sake of peace, then this story is for you. Subscribe for more true stories where justice isn't just handed out, it's crafted, piece by deliberate piece. And in the comments, tell me this: have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought time made you irrelevant? Because sometimes the people they try to erase are the very ones who hold the pen. My name is Margaret Dalton. I'm 63 years old. I taught American literature for 31 years, and I buried the love of my life 11 years ago. Daniel was a surgeon, precise, quiet, and steady. I used to say he held lives in his hands while I held them in words. We were a good match. We raised one son, Nathan, and I gave that boy everything I had left when Daniel died. The first few years after losing Daniel were hollow. Nathan was my anchor then. We'd talk every Sunday. He'd come by for dinners. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on the old couch after we'd watched some terrible courtroom drama together. I never thought I'd have to fight for space in his life, but I also never imagined Ashley. Ashley Cole appeared like static in a clear signal. She was sharp, polished, and always a little too aware of the room. Nathan brought her to my house the first time without warning. She smiled wide, complimented the wallpaper, then asked if I'd considered modernizing it. That night, she offered to help with dishes, only to rearrange my cabinets and say it was more efficient. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. But that wasn't nerves. That was territory marking. Ashley didn't come from nothing. She came from calculated ambition. Her father owned a construction firm. Her mother ran a boutique PR agency. From the outside, she was a success story, but underneath was something colder. She had this way of making compliments feel like critiques. She'd say, "You're so lucky to have had a marriage like that." As if I should fold myself up and disappear with it. Nathan, bless him, was blind to it, or maybe he chose to be. He started pulling back. Sunday calls became bi-weekly check-ins. He'd mention how overwhelmed Ashley felt by family expectations. She didn't like obligations, especially not ones she didn't create. I started being excluded, first from dinners, then birthdays, then their engagement party. They claimed it was a small affair, but photos on social media showed dozens of guests. I wasn't among them. Still, I showed up where I could. I brought them a wedding gift they never acknowledged, a framed first edition of Great Expectations with a handwritten note inside. I got back a generic thank you card signed only by Nathan. No message, just his name. I told myself it was fine. They were building their life. I didn't want to be the mother-in-law who clings, who crowds. But I noticed the pattern. Ashley didn't push me out directly. She made me feel like I didn't belong, and Nathan, he just let it happen. One afternoon, a neighbor mentioned Ashley was pregnant. I hadn't heard. I called Nathan. He said, "We were going to tell you. We just didn't want any stress around it. Stress. That's what I'd become to them. Not a mother, not a future grandmother, just stress. Thanksgiving was supposed to change things. I invited them, as always. Ashley agreed, on the condition that I host at my house but follow her dietary preferences. I nodded. I said I'd do my best. I always had. I cooked everything from scratch. The stuffing Daniel loved, the sweet potatoes Nathan always stole bites from while they baked, the spiced apple pie my mother taught me to make. I polished the good china, ironed the linens, set the table like it mattered. They arrived 40 minutes late. Ashley brought a gluten-free tart from some boutique bakery. Nathan didn't greet me with a hug. They acted like guests at a hotel. Dinner began with tension disguised as small talk. Ashley commented on how nostalgic the decor was. Nathan scrolled his phone under the table. I asked if they'd decided on names for the baby. Ashley laughed and said, "We'll pick something that isn't stuck in the 70s. By dessert, the rest of the table was mostly silent. Ashley lifted her glass, her eyes locked on mine. That's when she said it. Called me expired trash in front of everyone. And Nathan, he didn't flinch, didn't defend me, just sipped his wine and looked away. Something inside me shifted. I didn't cry, I didn't break, but I stopped hoping they'd change. That night, after they left, I washed the dishes in silence. I moved through my house like a stranger in a museum of my own memories. I dried the wine glasses carefully and placed them back in the cabinet, hands steady, movements exact, because I knew what I was going to do next, and it would start with a name they'd forgotten still mattered. Mine. In the days after Thanksgiving, silence settled like dust across every surface in my home. Nathan didn't call. Ashley certainly wouldn't. I waited a week, then 2. Nothing. Not even a thank you. Not for the meal. Not for the invitation. Not for my silence. I found myself thinking less about what they said and more about what they didn't. That was the real betrayal. Nathan's eyes on his plate while his wife gutted me. The quiet was louder than any insult. Still, I kept moving. I returned to my morning routine. Tea at 6, walk around the block. Classical music while I read through my old teaching notes, pretending I wasn't scanning every sentence for metaphors that might explain how a child forgets his mother. December came. Nathan texted a week before Christmas. Ashley wants to do something small this year, just us. Hope you understand. That was his way of saying, "You're not invited." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The memories came sharper after that. The time Ashley threw out the quilt my mother made for Nathan's first apartment, saying it looked out of place. The Sunday I stopped by unannounced with soup when Nathan was sick, only to have Ashley meet me at the door and say he was resting and I should text next time. The way Nathan didn't even ask about Dad on the anniversary of his passing. Bit by bit, they'd rewritten what family meant, and I had let them, but not anymore. It started small. I revisited some of my legal files. The penthouse they lived in, the one with the skyline view and the marble counters, had been financed in part by me. After Daniel died, I sold the lake house to help Nathan with his down payment. At the time, I told him it was a gift, but my name stayed on the deed. Quietly, purposefully. I called my friend Eliza, a retired attorney who once handled my estate planning. We had tea. I asked a few questions. When I showed her the paperwork, she raised her eyebrows and said, "You still hold controlling interest in that property." That sentence didn't feel like revenge. It felt like gravity returning. Then I started asking questions, quietly, carefully. Through a mutual friend in finance, Derek, one of Nathan's high school buddies, I learned that Ashley's spending habits were more than frivolous. She was carrying personal debt Nathan didn't know about. Clothing subscriptions, overseas charges, Some money trail tied to a second phone account. It wasn't just vanity, it was deception. I also found out she'd tried to push Nathan into signing a post-nuptial agreement, something about asset protection before the baby came. He never did. She played it off as smart planning, but I saw the pattern. Everything Ashley touched, she tried to own. Everything she couldn't own, she tried to discredit. That included me. And through it all, Nathan did nothing, just like he had at Thanksgiving. One cold Tuesday in mid-December, I drove to Ashley's office. She worked in branding, helping companies build identities they didn't deserve. I brought a bouquet of white roses, told the front desk I was surprising my daughter-in-law. Ashley met me in the lobby. She looked stunned, but she smiled anyway. A performance, just like everything else. I handed her the flowers, said I was sorry for Thanksgiving, that I understood the stress of the holidays. She placed a hand on my arm and said, "Thank you, Margaret. That means a lot. It really does." Her voice was syrup, but her eyes stayed cold. I knew in that moment she didn't respect me. She didn't even fear me. She thought I was over. That was her mistake. Christmas Eve, I cooked a full dinner for one. Daniel's playlist on the stereo, the scent of sage and thyme in the air. I set the table for 3 anyway, left their seats empty. Not as a tribute, but a reminder, because while they were carving out their future, I was preparing something much more precise. My breaking point wasn't loud. It didn't come with slammed doors or screaming matches. It came in the form of a document I pulled from the safe that night, the original deed, my name still engraved in ink. It came in the way my hand didn't tremble when I started typing the first draft of what would become Ashley's unraveling. She called me expired trash. She didn't realize expired things still carry weight, especially when they're the foundation everything else stands on. And I was ready to pull the foundation out from under her, one legal thread at a time. After Christmas, I moved differently. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't hope for apologies. I woke up earlier. I read more case law than novels, and I started seeing people not as loved ones but as variables, patterns, weaknesses. Nathan had become one of those variables, predictable in his silence, comfortable in avoidance. And Ashley was still too arrogant to realize the walls were already shifting around her. I met with Eliza again. This time, I brought every relevant document, deed records, wire transfers, even old emails showing my financial contributions. We sat in her dining room for hours. When I was done, she leaned back and said, "You're holding every card, Margaret. All you have to do is play them." So I began assembling the structure, quietly, like a scaffolding behind a facade. First, the deed. Legally, the penthouse still listed me as co-owner. Nathan had assumed it was symbolic. It wasn't. I had full legal authority to remove access and reassign rights. Eliza drafted the formal petition to transfer ownership solely into my name, on grounds of unacknowledged investment and misrepresentation of verbal contracts. Then there was the financial trail. Derek gave me everything he could find. Ashley had opened 2 credit cards Nathan didn't know about. She'd withdrawn small amounts from their shared savings to cover late fees. There were also text logs, nothing overtly romantic, but certainly suggestive, between her and a man named Tyler. Photos, emojis, things a married woman doesn't send if she's committed. We documented it all. Screenshots, affidavits, time-stamped entries. Eliza made sure it was airtight. I wasn't after drama. I was building consequence. But revenge, real revenge, doesn't come only through documents. It requires performance, subtle, calm, believable. So I reached out to Ashley again. I asked her to coffee. I congratulated her on the pregnancy. I brought her an old baby book of Nathan's. She laughed at the cover, called it adorably outdated. I smiled, told her I was just trying to be included. She leaned in, patted my hand, and said, "You're always welcome, Margaret. I know we got off to a rocky start." She really believed she'd won. that I had bent beneath her. Inside, I felt nothing. Not hatred, not grief, just distance. Later that night, I finalized the package, the deed transfer, the evidence of infidelity, the financial disclosures, the formal divorce papers I had drafted, with Nathan's name already filled in. He hadn't asked for them yet, but I had a feeling he soon would, because I wasn't just going to remove Ashley from my life. I was going to make sure she couldn't poison the next chapter of his either. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. Dreamless. Still. It wasn't forgiveness that brought me peace. It was the knowledge that control had returned to my hands. It was a clear, bitter day in early January when I invited them over again. Just the three of us. I told Nathan I'd made his favorite, rosemary lamb, garlic mashed potatoes, that same apple tart his father used to request on winter nights. He sounded hesitant, but he agreed. Ashley arrived 10 minutes late, as always. Her perfume entered the room before she did. Nathan followed quietly, his eyes scanning the familiar walls he once called home. I welcomed them both with a warmth I had rehearsed to perfection. Dinner was served without conflict. I let Ashley dominate the conversation. She boasted about their upcoming trip to Paris, made casual remarks about hiring a live-in nanny after the baby came, then mocked a colleague who'd gained weight during her third trimester. I nodded. I refilled her glass. Nathan said little. After dessert, I stood up and reached into the buffet drawer beside me. "I have something for you both," I said, placing a thick envelope on the table. My tone was calm, measured. Ashley smirked. "You didn't have to bring out photo albums, Margaret. It's not a photo album," I said. Nathan opened the envelope. Inside were 3 sets of documents: the deed transfer, the financial disclosures, and the divorce. Papers, all stamped, notarized, organized in descending order of consequence. Ashley's smile faltered. "What is this?" Nathan asked, leafing through the pages. I looked directly at Ashley. "It's everything you hoped would stay buried. Unfortunately for you, I know where I left my shovel." Ashley laughed. A short, stunned sound. "You're bluffing." "You're not on the deed," I said softly. "Never were. I pulled the original mortgage documents. Your signature is nowhere. I have full rights to reassign the property. As of this morning, the penthouse belongs solely to me." Ashley stood, voice rising. "You can't just take our home." "It was never yours," I replied. "I gave Nathan a chance to protect it. You convinced him to decline." Nathan was pale. His eyes flitted between us. "I've also included a full financial breakdown," I continued, sliding a printed summary across the table. "The hidden credit lines, the second phone, and Tyler." Ashley froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. "I don't know who you think you are," she began. "I'm the woman you dismissed," I said, voice level. "The woman you called trash in front of 10 people. The woman who raised the man you thought you could control." Ashley looked at Nathan. "You're not seriously going along with this?" Nathan still hadn't spoken. He simply stared at the paperwork, at the figures, at the photos. From the hallway, Eliza stepped into view. She'd been waiting there the entire time, listening. She wore her old courtroom face, calm, firm, dispassionate. "If you raise your voice again," Eliza said, "we'll conclude the conversation legally." Ashley sat down, fast. The air was still, heavy. I stood tall at the head of the table. "You wanted to shame me at my own table, but you forgot. This table doesn't belong to you. It never did." As I collected the empty plates, Ashley stayed frozen in her chair, eyes wide, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Nathan remained seated, his head in his hands. No shouting, no threats, just consequence. Measured, delivered, complete. And as I stacked the dishes, I felt something lift. Not anger, not vengeance. just the quiet, steady return of something that had been missing for years. Control. By the end of that week, the pieces had begun to fall. Ashley moved out of the penthouse in a hasty blur of phone calls and silent tears. She packed her things, while Nathan stayed at a friend's place. She didn't speak to me again, not directly. Her lawyer tried, called Eliza, pushed back on the deed, questioned the evidence. But the documents were clean, and when the screenshots surfaced, flirtatious messages, receipts, timelines, her case folded before it could stand. The penthouse was mine again. I didn't change much. Just repainted the study, had the windows resealed. I removed the custom drapes Ashley once insisted on and donated them to a women's shelter. I kept Daniel's chair by the fireplace, and one evening I sat there and lit the first fire of the new year. Nathan reached out, softly, like someone testing a cold door. He sent a message. I didn't know how far things had gone. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some silences need time. What I did do, quietly, purposefully, was breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving in someone else's story. I had reclaimed my own. I used to believe that family was unconditional, that love meant enduring silence, swallowing pain, and waiting for people to come back to themselves. But love without boundaries isn't loyalty, it's surrender, and I've surrendered enough. I learned something through all of this, that dignity isn't about walking away without scars. It's about knowing when to stop bleeding for people who don't look back. Ashley saw my age as weakness. She thought time had eroded my worth, but time had only sharpened it. I had forgotten who I was beneath the roles I carried, mother, widow, placeholder, but I remembered. And Nathan, maybe one day he'll understand what silence costs, what cowardice robs from those who love us most. But this isn't about him anymore, this is about me, and the quiet, steady power of reclaiming space I was told I no longer deserved. She called me expired, but I've never felt more alive. If you've ever been written off because of your age, your silence, or your kindness, let this story remind you, the ones they count out are often the ones they should have feared most. Hit that like button if you've ever taken back control from someone who underestimated you. Subscribe for more cinematic stories where revenge isn't loud, but precise, deliberate, and earned. And in the comments, tell me, has anyone ever tried to erase your worth? What did you do when they did? Because justice doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it arrives in silence, wearing calm like armor, ready to collect what was never theirs to take.